All right, welcome to this training section where we're going to be talking about the PARQ form and explaining the PARQ form before we actually get into the tactical of actually creating, setting up, editing, and then testing your PARQ form. So the very first question is, hey, we talked about a little bit about it before, but what is the PARQ form? So the PARQ form stands for Physical Activity Readiness Questionnaire. Now, what it is, it's a self-screening tool that a client completes before engaging in a physical activity. Okay, so self-screening means that it's questions that they ask. Essentially, they're reflecting on it, right? And then once they actually do it, we have some automations that go ahead and tell them, hey, because you answered yes to these questions, you are not going to be fit for this. Or because you answered no to these questions, you are going to be a fit for this. So for us as professionals, it helps us identify any health issues that could take place before we actually have them do physical activity that might potentially be a risk for them. And so the form is made up of a number of yes or no questions about the client's medical history, the current health status, any symptoms that they might have during exercises. And the last thing that you want to have, right? Trust us on this because we've been in the industry for a long time. We've done this many times. The last thing you want to do is you want to find out that your client passed out during a physical activity when they were in a session with you. It's honestly one of the worst things that can ever happen because when they're in a session with you, they're trusting you, right? You are kind of taking care of them throughout that process. And so it kind of feels like it was an abandonment or a loss of trust, or kind of like you violated the trust that was built when you didn't actually take care of them. So you just want to do your best to make sure that they do not have any medical history, kind of health issues before you actually work with them. And so that way, once you actually do the PARQ before you work with them, it allows you to actually adjust their plan accordingly, because then you can actually have that communication around some of the issues that they might have around their conditions, right? And so let's say, for example, you have a client who has CHD, coronary heart disease, right? And they, let's say, for example, have a severe blockage in their arteries. Well, you got to know that before you just throw them into like some crazy HIIT training and then their heart can't handle that intensity. And then all of a sudden they're having a heart attack on your floor, right? That's not a good thing. And so it's very important for you to have that information ahead of time. So the PARQ allows you to prepare ahead of time instead of what you might focus on. So you can actually then focus on ahead of time and say, you know what, instead we're going to focus on, nutrition coaching, and then we're going to do walking instead of doing maybe strength training or HIIT training or etc. Right? And now the other thing that's very important to understand is that the PARQ form, it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a self-screening tool, okay? It is not a legally binding agreement, kind of like how the previous ones were, right? So when we talk about the new client agreement, we talk about the liability waiver, those are more legally binding agreements. However, the PARQ form is much easier to set up because it's more of just a information kind of getting form, right? It's not really a legally binding form. And so that way, even inside of the actual app, inside of the business platform, we're going to be using a different feature, which is a surveys and forms feature. So that way, it's not going to be legally binding agreement, okay? And so that way it's going to be a little bit easier to set up as well, okay? So now you got a little bit of an understanding of what the PARQ form is. What we're going to now go ahead and do is in the next couple training sections, we are going to go ahead and break this up into two. The first training section is all going to be about how to actually create your PARQ form, okay? So we're going to talk about creating your PARQ form. It's going to be about how to import the PARQ form. Again, we've already done 80 to 90% of the work for you. We're then going to talk about how to edit the PARQ form so that way you're informed, even though there's not a lot of editing that has to be done. At least that way you're empowered and informed of when you do and if you do ever have to edit the form, this is how you would do it. And then the second training section, we're going to be talking about how to actually test the PARQ form, okay? And inside of that one, we're going to talk about the email notifications, how to set that up, as well as how to actually send the PARQ form so that way you can test it yourself, as well as how to check for submissions for that, okay? So that is what is going to be following up in the next immediate training sections. And in this training section, all we did was go ahead and explain a little bit more about what the PARQ form is, talk a little bit more about it, and then give you a rundown of what is to come up next. So keep that momentum going, get your PARQ form set up. Immediately right after this, we will catch you in the next training section.